Imagine standing helpless while your 13-year-old daughter screams as hot metal sears her skin. The air thickens with smoke and the metallic smell of burning flesh. People laugh. Laughter, sharp, cruel, fills the yard as if the sound could erase what is happening. In the middle of the noise, a mother holds herself still. She does not scream back. She watches. If this already has you on edge, subscribe now. There's more to this story. We place this story in 1845, on a plantation called Boa Esperança, in the coastal hinterlands of Sergipe. The house sits back from the fields. The owner is mostly absent. Authority is exercised by men who answer to him. Among them is Antonio Pereira, the overseer, a man who believes terror is a way to keep order. He carries a small branding iron known locally as a sineta, a narrow heated rod used to leave a mark as punishment and public shame. In household lore, and in the whispers of those who remember, Antonio used the sineta as both instrument and theatre, heat, pain, and a demonstration of power. This account comes from local memory and oral retelling. Some versions place it in the 1840s, others in the 1850s. Records are scarce. The exact year can shift in the telling. For the purpose of this telling, we anchor the moment in 1845. Rosa was 34. She was not remarkable in the way the plantation master or the overseer thought remarkable. She had no flashy defiance, no grand speeches. She had a steady hand, a watching eye, a child's small body to protect. Her daughter Anna was 13. Anna's world was one of daily chores, whispered games under the mango trees, the feel of coarse cloth, and the constant undercurrent of threat. The overseer saw youth as an opportunity, a way to humiliate, to teach submission. The incident that set everything in motion began with accusation. Small theft or imagined disrespect, a reason to display punishment. They made a spectacle. The yard filled with faces, some forced attendants, some bystanders who had learned to look away. Antonio stepped forward carrying the sineta. The metal hissed when heated. Someone brought coals. Someone thumped the iron until it glowed. Anna was brought into the center. Rosa reached for her. Someone pushed her back. The overseer called out names and meant to show he could place his mark not only on bodies but on minds. He branded Anna first. She screamed. The sound was a raw child sound, something that cut the air and stayed there. People laughed as if hearing a child in pain were a natural thing. The branding left a scar and a story. Then they turned to Rosa, perhaps to add insult to injury, perhaps because he wanted to show that no one could interfere with his authority. They burned her too. The iron burned her forearm. The pain was registered in the hush that followed the second scream. The crowd's laughter faltered. In the silence afterwards, something else hardened in Rosa. She did not seek immediate revenge. There was no outburst. She had learned what the plantation taught everyone: discretion, obedience when necessary, and that survival often requires patience. But patience, in Rosa's case, was not submission. It was a tactic. She watched. He believed he had made both mother and child transparent, marked, known, controlled. He relished the spectacle of demonstration. What he did not notice was the way Rosa's eyes watched him afterward, like a woman learning every step of a dance she intended to repeat on her own terms. She studied his routines. She noted who came to the house for drinks, whose steps were heavy, whose keys jingled at night. She learned when the overseer slept the sleep of the drunk. She watched the placement of the sineta at the place where he kept his things, a small cupboard under a table in the veranda. She watched the men who guarded the master's house. She watched the gaps. Over months, weeks stretched and became months, Rosa walked the plantation with a new attention. She could have been seen as merely the same steady worker, bent over the same tasks. But her mind collected detail. Night after night she cracked a door to listen. She waited for the sound of revelry, for the loosened talk of men who had eaten too much and drunk too much. She learned the hour when the house settled into its sleep. She kept a small knife hidden, a thin blade she could sharpen quietly, a tool that could practice the motions she would one day need. She practiced with nothing but the air, little precise motions that fit in the palm. She spoke to no one about the plan. Words could undo what watching could build. There are moments when silence is louder than speech. Rosa's silence became an accumulation. Each observation added to a quiet map, where the overseer set his cup, how he left his clothes in the dark when he locked himself in. She watched his pride, a steady, brittle thing. He did not expect that the woman he had humiliated could be patient. He did not expect that humiliation could be returned with the same instrument. The night came as it had come before, a feast in the master's house. Men who held authority over the lives of others ate, drank, and boasted. Music might have sounded in the corner, low and steady. Guests, other overseers, capatazes, came to be seen and to see. Their laughter rolled into the night and softened into heavier breathing. The house grew louder and then quieter. People gradually left in pairs or alone. Antonio staggered back to his room confident. He had been the performer of the spectacle. He had every reason to feel untouchable. Rosa moved when the yard had emptied and the house had settled. She did not run. She went with the slowness of someone whose body and senses had learned to keep secrets. The cinetta was where she had seen it, inside the small cupboard beneath the table. It was still warm from earlier use. Metal retains heat longer than we expect. She handled it with a steadiness that surprised even her. The metal bit under her fingers told the story of the night's ordeal. The smell that clung to it, the faint ash. She warmed the iron again if she needed to, until it took on the color of a thin sunset. Entering Antonio's room was like stepping into the belly of the plantation's arrogance. His boots lay carelessly by the door. The man slept heavily, the weight of drink making his breath regular, loud. He had left his lamp low. The room hummed with soft shadows. Rosa approached. The world narrowed to a few steps, the feel of floorboards under her feet, the heat of the iron against her palm. She had imagined this moment in cautious fragments, the lift of the iron, the touch of it, the knowledge that the tool that had been used on her child could be turned in a way that would force him into the same vulnerability he had inflicted. This was not a mirror image of cruelty. It was a reversal with a purpose. She placed the heated cinetta against his cheek. The sound was a small, unceremonious hiss. The man woke with a sharp animal cry. Not the child's keening, but a guttural start that spoke of surprise and pain. Hands slapped at his face. He struck the table, sat up, disoriented. For a moment he could not make sense of the world. The one in which he had been in control had folded into a pain he had not expected to feel on his own skin. He looked at himself in the dim light and saw the mark. It was not the large public brand he had delivered to others. It was a personal burn that announced that someone had been where he considered herself sovereign. A person had crossed his boundary. Panic flowed into his features. He called out. Someone brought a lamp. People murmured and then recoiled when they saw the mark. He tried to explain. He swore he had been bitten in some strange accident. He claimed an animal might have done it. He put on outrage as a mask, demanding to know who would dare. But the wound was a story unto itself. He could not very well make a spectacle of his own pain in the same way he had of others. Pain on those who wield it does not land the same. Some who had watched him brand others could not bring themselves to laugh the way they had. A few voices said quietly that perhaps his pride had been the instrument that bent against him. No formal investigation followed. The plantation had its codes. The master, Coronel Joaquim Batista de Souza, could not be bothered with every disturbance in his household. But the aftermath was social and often just as decisive. Antonio's authority dimmed. Men who had once deferred to him did so less readily. The capatazes began to call him by his name in ways they had not before. He lost privileges, small things that compound into social isolation. Fewer seats at the table, less consideration when ordering work to be done. Stories moved through the quarters like wind. The overseer who had branded a child had been marked himself. People who had once feared nearly everything began to note that the world had a flaw in it. Antonio's decline was not swift and theatrical. It unfolded in the small erosions of dignity. A man whose power depended on spectacle and fear found neither work as fulfilling nor respect as easy to command. His temper grew shorter. He drank more to blot out the humiliation. When men like him lose their unquestioned place, they often fracture in ways that make them less effective but more dangerous to themselves than to others. Some said he grew quieter. Some said he became more paranoid. In the end, he lived out his years a diminished figure, humiliated in town gossip, if not punished by law. That is the social consequence the story records. The man's authority was undermined, his presence diminished, and the plantation order shifted in small but meaningful ways. Rosa returned to her chores. She did not parade her victory. In the quarters she moved through the same paths, fetched water from the same well, hung the same laundry. Her hands kept the same work, and her mouth kept the same words, economy of speech being both habit and shield. To some, she was simply the woman who had been branded alongside her daughter and then kept on living. To others, she was a careful, named example of cunning resistance. In the evenings, she sat beneath the mango tree and told the story in fragments to those who had ears. An image here, a caution there, not as a boast, but as a record. People who lived under the same conditions learned to preserve truths outside of formal documents. Oral memory does the work that archives refuse. Stories circulate in kitchens, at wellheads, and in the hush between chores. They are passed in metaphors, in jokes, in warnings. Rosa's action became one of those stories. Proof to those who needed proof that a human being could reclaim a measure of dignity even when law and property worked against them. There is a moral complication that comes with this account. It is not a simple tale of righteous revenge. It is a narrative of a mother, under extreme coercion, who made a choice within a brutal, asymmetrical power system. She used the overseer's own instrument against him. From some perspectives that is revenge, from others it is resistance. The difference matters to people who study ethics, and it mattered more to those who had to live after the moment. Rosa did not set out to create a model for violence. She sought to protect, to deter, and to restore dignity in a space that refused to grant it. The act was symbolic and strategic. It was a calculated reversal, aimed at undermining the overseer's spectacle of supremacy. Reflecting on such actions forces us to stand with complexity. There is an urge in modern ears to ask for legal justice, for courts and clear verdicts. In a world where enslaved people had virtually no legal recourse, community-level consequences were sometimes the only form of accountability available. That does not mean all lessons from this incident condone harm. We do not offer this as a template for modern action. We tell it because it reveals how power operates and how, even within oppressive systems, people found ways to assert personhood. Stories like this survive because they are retold. Each telling alters a detail, reshapes a face, shifts a date. Some versions say 1855. Most place it broadly in the mid-19th century. What remains steady is the core: a mother, a daughter, an overseer, and a mark that changed the immediate web of authority on a small plantation called Boa Esperança. Rosa's life afterward was measured in the ordinary rhythms of chores and care. Anna grew older. The scar was an index of a pain that had once been public and then quietly reclaimed. They did not become legends in any formal sense. They became known figures in stories people used to teach caution and hope. The community held the narrative as part of its moral repertoire, a reminder that dignity can be claimed, sometimes in ways that are quiet and patient rather than loud and public. We must also be careful not to romanticize. The act was born from horror. The branding of a child was a cruelty that left a mark beyond skin. Rosa's response was a product of the conditions that necessitated it. To tell this story is to acknowledge the depth of harm people inflicted under systems of domination, and to recognize the forms of resistance that emerged in reply. It is not a tidy victory. It is a human answer to dehumanization. Accounts vary. Local memory places this in the 1840s. Some versions say 1855. For this telling, we anchor it in 1845 as a way to name it and to remember it with a time. But remember that the lack of formal records means the story survives in the mouths of those who carried it forward. There is one final thing to note about how stories themselves shape social consequence. When a community tells of an overseer who was marked, those who wielded terror discovered their acts had a cost in reputation and in the willingness of others to follow them unquestioningly. That social cost sometimes led to small changes: less public spectacle, more caution in the use of force, and occasionally a redistribution of how power was enacted on the plantation. This does not erase the system that made the harm possible, but it does show that power is not absolute. It is contested in everyday acts and in the stories that travel. If you believe memory matters, drop one word in the comments: Mark. Share this video so the story travels. If you haven't yet, subscribe to help keep these untold and little-told histories alive. Remember that these are voices saved by memory, fragile, resilient and essential to understanding who we were and who we might yet become. We leave you with the image that started this: a small child screaming when metal touched her skin, a mother standing still while the world laughed, and then the slow turning of a quiet, patient resistance, a mark that did not erase pain, but changed the balance of shame and power on a little plantation in Sergipe in 1845.